There we go. And so now our snake is moving 1 tile per quarter second. So we can slow this down. Welcome back to Arcade. I am Super Tommy, and in this video we're looking at Kaboom.js, and we're going to build a snake game. So Snake is a fairly old game. You probably played it back in the days of the Nokia candy bar phone. Some of you may not even know what that is, but it was this, like chocolate bar type form factor phone. And there was this snake game. Basically, it's like a green dot or a green square, and it'll go along in like a grid pattern or grid space. So it goes up, one grid at a time, or left, right, up, down. And every time you eat a food piece, the snake would get longer. I think there's a newer game called Slither.io, one of these IO games that you may have heard of. Similar idea, but snake is the originator of that concept, where eating food grows the length of your snake. And if your snake runs into itself, then you lose. And the goal is, of course, in Snake to eat as much food as you can to make your snake as long as it can. So we're going to build that game in Kaboom.js using the nice functional component system. Now, before we start, if you are enjoying our videos on Kaboom.js or Phaser 3, be sure to hit like on this video and subscribe for more videos on making games on the web. So let's get started. Alright, so we have here a project that I've set up. This is VS Code, and this is what it's going to show you. Now we have this test here just to show that this project is largely working. So we have actually installed Kaboom.js as an NPM dependency this time. So if we go to Kaboom.js, now we did this so we can get some better VS Code code completion IntelliSense. So Kaboom.js has, let me make this bigger, move to TypeScript, and there is types that we can get to help us out when we're coding here in VS Code. So we were doing the CDN script import previously in the 5 tips video and for the Matter.js physics video using Kaboom.js. This time we're actually doing the npm install Kaboom, so we have that in our project here. We go to our package.json, you can see we have Kaboom 0.5.1. So we're going to do it this way. Now if you are using Parcel, if you've done our Phaser videos and you're using a similar setup to those guys, where we're using Parcel and we're doing it here in this video, the way Kaboom is exported, I think Parcel doesn't know how to read that particular format in their package.json, so I've set an alias here for the Kaboom module name, and it points to the MJS file, which is what you want. Otherwise, it's going to include another type of file, which then it fails to actually add the exported Kaboom instance to the exports, and so it's just not going to work. So if you're using Parcel or maybe some other bundler and you're having this problem, look for aliases in that bundler, in their API or wherever it is that they set up their config, to check for basically aliasing it to an MJS, since we're using ES6 style JavaScript here. Right, so that's what we're doing here. Let's go back to this. We'll make this smaller. That's just some setup to let you know. So now we in main, I got some to-dos here. So we're going to create a scene, and we're going to import that scene, register it, and then start it. So we have this test here, but we're going to split our code into multiple files like we've talked about in our 5 tips video. I think it's just easier to reason about that way, and you'll want to eventually when you make your games bigger or more complicated. So just go back on our previous thing. We don't no longer include the Kaboom.js file up here. We are installing it as an npm dependency and then just importing it here. And so this is the note about the alias I wanted to make sure I let you guys know about. And so we're importing Kaboom from Kaboom like any other library imported via npm. And so we're doing this setup here just like we did for this Kaboom setup function. It creates a Kaboom context, right? We get this nice code completion here from VS Code because of the type files in the 0.5 version of Kaboom. And so we're just setting up Kaboom here. Then we export this K so that we can use this Kaboom context elsewhere in our game, since we're having multiple files. Okay, so here is our main. So now let's actually make a snake scene. Let's go here. We have our folder structure here. We've got our main or Kaboom. We have our index, then we have our scenes folder and a components folder. We're going to put components into the components folder and our scenes in our scenes folder. This is just one way of organizing. It may not be the best, but for a small project, this generally works pretty well. Let's make a new file here in the scenes folder. We're going to call it snake.js. And then here we're going to first export a function, which is going to be a scene. So snake. And there's that. And let's just do a console.log here. Snake scene. So that's our snake scene. And let's go to main. Let's import snake from scenes snake. We can delete our tests here. So if we want to import the scene, that's done. Register the scene. So k.scene, let's call it snake. So this is how we register. We give it a string name and then the actual function. That's the scene. And then start. k.start snake. Now we should see a console log snake scene. So that's great. That's working. Remove these to-dos. Now back to our snake scene. Let's close some of these. So what we want to do in Snake, we start building our game now, is have a square, basically, then have it move. So let's start by creating a square, or a rect here in Kaboom. So let's import K from Kaboom. And so you've seen in the Kaboom docs where you can do K dot, and we've done that in other videos as well, and K dot add. Let's create an entity. You can pass components here. But we could also avoid having to keep typing K, so what we can do is destructure some of the things out of the Kaboom context. So for example, like this, then we can just do, after that, add. And it's the same thing. It's this add function, takes a list of components and returns to you a entity or a game object here. So we're going to use this style here so that we don't have to type K dot for all of our components and all of the functions from the Kaboom context each time. So what we're going to want, we're going to add, we need a position component. These are all the built-in components from Kaboom. We want a rect component. Let's give it a color component, and let's do origin. All right, so we're going to do position, and I just put it at 8. We want a rect component, and let's just say we're going to make a 16 by 16 square to represent our snake. That may be too big or too small, I guess we'll see. Rect, let's do color, and we're going to make this one green. So color takes a RGBA value. These are from 0 to 1, so we're going to do no red, all green, no blue, full alpha. And then let's just do origin center, just so that we're going to use the origin as the center of the square. Let's save that, and there it is. So there's our snake head, let's say. So the beginning of our snake game, it's just one block. So now we have that. What we're going to want now is a movement component, right? So what this snake does is it'll just automatically move based on where it's facing. And facing is going to be determined by the arrow keys. When you say, if you press the left arrow key, it's going to face left. Press the right arrow key, it's going to face right. It's going to move in that direction. So to do that, we're going to add another component. This is going to be a custom component to our snake entity here in add. So first I'll show you how to make this component inside this class, then we're going to move it out to a separate file so that we can be a bit more organized. So first, just to make any component, just any function anywhere. So function, let's call this movement. It's going to return an object that will be merged in with our entity here created by add. And let me check some notes for a second here. So in our any custom component, there's a few hooks. Add is one of them that gets called when this component is added to our game object or our entity here. And then there's update that's called each frame. Now for the movement case, we want the update hook And with update, we are going to want to move in a direction that it's facing. So let's give it a direction, and it should be a vec2 is what I want to use, which is built into Kaboom. So let's get that out of Kaboom. So vec2. So actually, here's the tip. If we do this first, then VS Code is going to tell us all the things that we can actually pull out of K. We want vec2. So vec2 is just a vector 2, which means it's a point. You can look at it that way. Vec2. And we're going to start direction at 0, 0, so we're not going to move in any direction. So this just means direction y, x and direction y, and we're going to just leave it between 1 and -1, where 0 means no movement. And we're going to want to make sure that whoever has this movement component also has a position component, or the post component. So let's see, in our update, it's going to be called each tick, which is about 60 times a second. So let's just make sure we have this dot post. So if not, we're going to do nothing, and we're just going to log an error to let us know that we've set up our component incorrectly here. Let's see, missing post component. And then if not, we have that. So what we're going to want to do is adjust it to move a certain speed every frame, let's say. So let's go with speed just being 1 for simplicity here. So this dot post.x plus equals, now we want direction, so direction.x times speed, and let's just set a speed over here. We want to change it at some point. Speed times speed. And so the same thing here for y, so direction.y times speed. Okay, so now of course at direction 0, 0, it's not going to do any movement at all. So let's just give it a try here with direction right, which is x1, y0, so we have that. So now let's put our movement component in here, and you see it's moving. So that's exactly what we expect. So we're going to want to use our arrow keys to actually adjust this. Now we could put the arrow key control logic into our movement component as well, but it may be more prudent to break that into a separate component as well, just to keep these components small. Before we do that, let's just separate this out into a separate file like we mentioned. So let's just take this movement component, just copy that, come here to our components folder, let's make a new file, call it movement.js. Let's paste that in. We want K, so we're going to import K from Kaboom like before, and we're going to export default this movement function, which is a component, and save. Right, everything's good. Let's come to Snake. Just delete this. Instead of writing that logic directly in there, we're going to import movement from components movement. Now, okay, it did work, there's no errors, but I changed this so that it would stop moving. So let's just test going the other direction, just go down. So yeah, so this is still working. We've moved the component into a separate class. Let's just keep the direction starting at 0. So the snake should move in a certain way when it starts, and we could set it, but just thinking ahead with our controls, we want to do when we press arrow keys, basically change the direction that it's going. So what we can do is add more functions to our component here. So one thing we can do, we can namespace some of our components. So, you know, like the position component doesn't just add X and Y directly onto the game object. It kind of namespaces inside this POS object. So you do this dot POS dot X. So we can do something similar, and here's how you could go about doing that. So let's say we add another key here. It's going to be itself an object. And then inside, let's say we're going to add, let's say right, left, up and down. So let's say left, and what left does, it's going to do direction.x -1, that's left, direction.y 0, so no longer moving up and down, it's only moving left. And let's go right, direction.x, this is just +1 on x, and then direction.y also 0. Up, direction.x this time is going to be 0, and then direction.y, so up is -1. Down, let's see, direction.x 0, direction.y +1 for down. So now what happens is when any game object or entity created with this component, you can then access this by this.movement.left.right.up.down. And so now we can adjust the direction from outside this component. Now we can also on add here say instead of not moving anywhere, we can either randomly pick a direction or just start with something. And so we'll just start with something. So we'll do this.movement. Let's just say it goes right. And there we go. So now we go back to snake here. That's good. So we're going to make another component. This is going to be the controls component, we'll call it. Let's come here. We're going to call it controls.js. So we will need the Kaboom instance. I'm pretty sure you almost always will want that. Export default function controls. And so what this component is going to do is when you press the arrow keys, change the direction of the snake head at least. So we're going to return out an object, and here we only need the add. So we're going to do something when the component is first added, and that's going to be detect the key presses. And so we want key press. So we want key press left, and that's going to do something. Right, we want key press right, and that's going to do something. We want key press up, and that's going to do something, and then key press down, and that's going to do something as well. So now left wants to change the movement of the snake left. So we could, most likely you want to be a little bit safe here, so you can do at least if this.movement. So if not this.movement, you can return. Probably do a little console.error, missing movement. You may not need to necessarily write the error if you're expecting to be able to have this component on an object without the movement component. Like it could be a different component too, or just other ways of doing this, but I'm just going to show you this like we did previously with the position. I'm going to do it just for this one as a demonstration. If you want to do it for your other ones, definitely feel free. So this .movement.left, so that's what that is. And then we can do this .movement.right, up, down. All right, something's missing. Yes. So now, of course, you don't necessarily need to break it out this granularly, where we have a controls component and a movement component. They could be one thing, and that would be fine. So let's just go out to snake and say we're going to have that controls component, controls from components controls. So now we're just going to add that controls. And let's go here and press down, and press left, down, right, up. So now we have the controls going. Now one thing we have here is, of course, that everything is moving at a smooth clip, right? It's going at 1 pixel every frame, so it's very smooth. But in the actual snake game, it moves basically at 1 tile at a time. So we're going to actually throttle this so that it only moves every, let's say, half second or quarter second or so each tile, instead of 1 pixel every frame. So to do that, I'm going to go to movement here and just adjust movement. Now to move on a tile, we need to actually determine where the tile placement is. So let's assume we have 16 by 16 tiles. And we're going to want to update or do this update every, let's say, quarter second. So first thing is easy. Let's just throttle this to make it only move every quarter second. So we're going to add this variable called accumulated time. It can't be a const. We're going to update that. Accumulated time. This is going to basically accumulate time. We're going to add up delta t, the time between from last frame, and then once that reaches a certain value in seconds, in this case 0.25 quarter second, we are going to then perform this movement. So let's go here and update. So first it's going to be accumulated time plus equals dt, so that's delta time since last frame. And then if accumulated time is less than, let's just say, quarter second, we're going to do nothing. And then if it is larger or equal to a quarter second, we're going to first of all reset accumulated time and then perform the rest of our logic. So you see it's moving much slower because it's moving 1 pixel every quarter second, or basically 4 pixels per frame. So we want to move actually more than that, and we're going to want to move 16 pixels, let's say. Right, so there we go. And so now our snake is moving 1 tile per quarter second. So we can slow this down or speed this up. So let's say we make this half second. Right. It's slower. And what you can do if you want to build on top of this is just, I think Snake probably does this, it speeds up the movement as you progress. So the longer your snake is, the faster it goes, and you can just do that by adjusting this 0.5 value. But okay, so now we have it moving on a grid. Now, let's see what we got here. Checking some notes here. Okay. Next thing is going to actually be to spawn some food. So we have our snake is moving. We need to spawn some food on the world so that the snake can eat it and then grow. So to spawn a food, we're going to add a spawner game object. Basically, that all it does is sits there and then it just spawns food once the last food is eaten. So let's go to our components. We're going to make another component and we're going to call it the spawn component. Component here, spawn.js. Let's just check here. Yep. Okay. So like any other component, we're gonna need Kaboom, probably the Kaboom context. Kaboom. And then we're gonna export this function out. We're gonna call it spawn. And what it's gonna do is when it's gonna have a function that's gonna get called, and then when that function gets called, it's going to spawn a food randomly somewhere on the map. So let's return out here, and we're gonna call a function spawn. We could name this something else, but I think that's actually fine. And what we're gonna want is to do it after a delay. It could do it immediately if you want, and that would be fine. But we'll do it after a wait. And what we're going to do is spawn a new entity, so we need add, and that thing is going to have a position, a rect, and a color. We'll make all our foods blue just to differentiate it from our snake pieces. So wait 1 second, and then we're going to do add. So position. So to start, let's just start it at some multiple of 16. Let's say 128. 128 rect. It'll also be 16 by 16. Color is going to be no red, no green, all blue, all alpha. We also want origin so that we can just keep this math the same for our snake pieces and our food. So origin. You may not actually need origin if you prefer doing your math in the top left corner opposed to the middle. That's entirely up to you. Okay, so we have that. Let's go to snake. Now let's import spawn from components spawn. And we're going to add a object that has one component, spawn. And we're going to call this the spawner. Okay, so once we add it, nothing will happen because there's that spawn method we need to call. And so let's just say after we've added everything down here, we're going to do spawner.spawn. And there's our food. Now what isn't happening yet, oh, and it's also not on the proper grid, right? It's just spawning anywhere. Although, oh, it's 128 and then we have to add 8. But nonetheless, we need to give it a position that is on the tile grid and then handle it colliding with our snake head. So that's what we're going to do in the next part of this video. So if you enjoyed this video, remember to hit like and subscribe to the Arcade YouTube channel for more videos on making games with Kaboom.js and other web technologies. Now come back for part 2.